So I'm really excited to introduce my next guest, Vic. Vic is my peer support supervisor. We have gotten the opportunity to work together over the past year. I've just learned so much about the peer support role. And sitting down with them during this episode, I learned even more. So I'm really excited to share this with you, and I hope you all enjoy.
So, Vic, I appreciate
Mhm.
your willingness to meet with me, not one, not two, but three times. And I think we're going to have good luck today doing it virtually because I've just had a better experience with that so far. So,
Sounds great. It's
uh,
always good to talk with you, Kyle. So, yeah, we'll make
yeah,
this work.
we'll make this work, we've met a couple times and I've I'm just shocked, first of all, at how much experience you really have. And you kind of had your hands in a lot of things throughout Wisconsin with the peer run respite, what you're doing
Mhm.
now with intentional peer support. You're my supervisor. I should probably, or my peer
Ah,
supervisor. So I should probably mention that. But I'm just really
mhm.
excited to learn from you and share with everyone else, your experience. So um, yeah, I guess I want to give you kind of the floor here.
Mhm.
If you're comfortable sharing a little bit about your background and you know, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. Yeah, so I know earlier before we started recording, we were talking about Minnesota, and that's actually where I grew up. I grew up in a small rural community, and I think some of that is really still I'm still kind of in this place of figuring out the things that impacted me that have led me to where I am now, and I think a lot of that is relevant as far as some of the really great things that I took from where I was raised and who raised me, and then some of the less than great things of, generational histories that we're kind of still unpacking and untangling. But I think for me, what I want to focus on is some of the things that I learned about community. And that had to do with, being in a rural environment where there was a farming history, there's family farms in my extended family. And we had this concept of just coming together to support one another through the cycles of the seasons. I grew up hearing stories about, um, when catastrophic things would happen. There would be a fire or there would be um, tornado or something, and then how would the community come together to support the person or the family that was impacted? So I think that has led me to some of that understanding of, we heal in community, we come together in community. But I think one of the other things that I took from this Midwestern upbringing is that there was this cultural understanding of there are some things we just don't talk about. And we don't talk about the hard stuff. And we don't talk about some of the legacies of abuse or how some of us self-medicate with substances or the ones in the family who the polite way of saying are a little bit different. Um, but what that means is that those of us who are different or who experience the world differently or who have real deep struggles with our mental health are the ones who kind of get sidelined and outcast, sometimes not intentionally, sometimes very intentionally. And so that was kind of my experience that once I started having those struggles, once I got deemed the sensitive one or the strange one, um, the lesson that I took in was that it was my problem to fix. And so I was the one who was sent to the mental health providers. I was the one who was sent away to uh, figure out how to be different or how to fit in. And so I think that kind of led me to this cycling of crisis after crisis, where I would have, some good years, some good times. I would, accomplish some great things, and then I would crash. And it would be a pretty significant crash. And I kind of found myself cycling in and out of different places, different kinds of interventions, different kinds of medications, all sorts of things. So experience the whole range of the psychiatric system, and it really wasn't helping. And in fact, it was leading to further harms. And so I think one of the things that did keep me going was the places where I could access community. And so some of those places where I accessed community was in activist movements of coming together with other people who were looking at the world differently and saying, maybe it's not just individual problems. Maybe there are reasons why people are struggling. Maybe there are, bigger systems that are impacting why we're experiencing trauma, why we're hurting. And can we do something different to create a different world? And those were places where I found community and where I found like that I'm not alone. And I think some of that too, that going back to some of my upbringing that made that possible was I was also very much connected to faith communities. And I was raised Catholic. So I was, again, very much a part of growing up. I was going to church every Sunday, experiencing the cycles of the liturgical calendar, the holidays, the family gatherings around the holidays. So some of that was really great. And then I also had the benefit of getting to meet some nuns and priests who were also engaged in doing work that I look back now and see was fairly radical. Like there were a couple of early mentors that I got to know as a teenager who spent time in Latin America and who were influenced by some of those movements of looking at spirituality in a different way, that this isn't just something you do on Sunday, but it's something that's going to make you look at the world differently and also look at, does God really will suffering, or is God giving us the tools to build beloved community and to shape the world in a different way? And I'm really grateful for those experiences. At the same time, I also got a lot of negative experiences from religion as well. And so that also was part of that confusion of, what do I want to take from the ways I was raised, the messages I was given as I was, growing up, and what am I going to carry forward? Um, so I don't know if all of that made sense. It made sense in my head, but I want to just pause right now and kind of hear from you first and kind of see where you want to take this next.
Yeah, no, that was great. I appreciate that and kind of the insight. I mean, I can relate to so much of what you said, especially kind of the cycles, right? That I've gone through in my own life with, stringing together some time where I don't know, I was successful in my own mind and then I would
Mhm,
crash, and I would
mhm,
usually crash really, really hard and then
mhm,
um so yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it sounds like that sense of community is really, I don't know, it's part of the whole peer support thing. I mean, you've kind of brought that into what you're doing
mhm.
now, and
Yeah.
so it's just, yeah, I appreciate you sharing all that. Do you, um, I'm trying to think back. So you did go to school, if I remember correctly. Can you talk a little bit
Mhm.
about what you went for and
Yeah, so I definitely was one of those people that wanted to get out of that small rural community as soon as I could. So I graduated high school, moved to Chicago, and I studied theology. I was really interested in how to create a different world through that lens of spiritual and social change. And so I was really impacted by that study and also feeling a calling to ministry, feeling like there's something here for me. I want to be able to be engaged in this world of, you know, faith-based kind of social change. So that was the plan. And um, again, it took me many years to finish that undergraduate degree because of the up and down struggles I had. But it also led to really wonderful connections. That's Chicago is where I first started doing activist work. And got connected to some really wonderful networks of people that are still friends to this day. And then Chicago led to the San Francisco Bay Area, where I continued my studies and I ended up getting a master's degree in theological studies. And that project led to doing a thesis project as part of the degree. And it was a project around mental health and spirituality. So by that point, I was really wanting to focus on the themes that kind of kept coming up for me in terms of what is what is needed for those of us who struggle, who are continuing to experience harm within psychiatric systems and all these social services that are not leading to the healing that we're seeking. And and at this point I was also feeling really isolated in faith communities as well. And so I was seeing a need for faith communities to do better as well. And so I was trying to bring it all together and think, well, how can we kind of reclaim some of these healing histories from our spiritual traditions, also bring in the social analysis and do something different. And so um, that's kind of where things landed in terms of my academic studies. But that also coincided with a really painful split with the Catholic Church that just became, very evident that the further I got into that institution, that there was just not a place for me there. And so I closed those doors as far as this is not going to be my faith community anymore. This is not going to be where I seek a career path. But that left me kind of in exile and wondering what next, where do I go? And it took me a few years and again, some more struggle and crisis to come through. Long story short, I ended up back in the Midwest and um, eventually started putting some of what I had done with my thesis project into workshops around that would be that I could present. And I got connected to something called the Alternatives Conference, which isn't currently happening, but used to be a really um, impactful annual event of people, primarily psychiatric survivors, but also for people working in peer support. And so 2014 was when I did my first workshop there and got connected to some really amazing people who now I consider friends and colleagues. And that was where I learned that, oh, there's this job that you can do called peer support and actually be paid for it. And I got connected to, I'd been hearing about these things called peer respite. And I thought, oh yeah, that sounds exactly what I want to be doing. But I didn't know how to get involved. So that was kind of where the groundwork started. And so I've kind of been in this world ever since then. And it's, yeah, actually 10 years ago this month that happened.
It's awesome. I know that based on some conversations we've had, you still do workshops for faith communities to kind of talk about some of the intersections of, mental health and faith.
Mhm.
And so I think that that's really interesting that you're still doing that work.
Mhm.
If you, so you started talking a little bit about peer run respites. Can you kind of,
Mhm.
because you were part of the um process of actually bringing it into Wisconsin, or at least in this area of Wisconsin, weren't you?
I can't take credit for the origins of it. That was long before I moved to Wisconsin.
Okay.
But I was part of one of the first that opened. So after many years of legislative advocacy, of activism, of a lot of people throughout Wisconsin in, yeah, in the early 2000s upwards, it was an opportunity where grant funding was allocated to open first three different peer-run respites. And so in 2016, I got a job offer to move to Wisconsin from Minnesota to help with one of those that was just opening. And I worked there for a couple of years. And unfortunately, that first program didn't succeed through a combination of some big changes that went through that organization. And another story that I won't get into here, but what ended up happening was that a couple of us who were part of that initial peer respite in Menominee, Wisconsin, were approached by the Department of Health Services because they saw what we had done that had worked well and said, "Hey, do you want to be part of reopening a peer respite in that same location in Menominee?" And so group of us came together, talked it through, said, okay, well, all we have to do is start a nonprofit. And so that led to the founding of Wisconsin Milkweed Alliance. And then the Peer Respite was named Monarch House. And that was in 2018, I believe, that we opened that up again.
And for those who aren't maybe familiar with the peer run respite model, can you kind of talk about
Mhm.
what that looks like for people?
Yeah, absolutely. So Peer Respite is meant to be an alternative to other interventions that are more restrictive or more carceral. So things like um, a psych ward or jail or a locked crisis stabilization or just any place where folks would be experiencing crisis and then would have their power taken away. And so the hope with Peer Run Respite is that it can be a place where if you are experiencing crisis related to mental health, substance use, or any other big life interrupting situation in your life that you experience as crisis, you can come for a short period of time and be supported by people who have that same lived experience or similar lived experiences. So it's completely non-clinical. There is nobody in a clinical role in a peer run respite. It's all peer support led. And it's meant to be as home-like as possible. So actual homes, so it's like what you would, hope for. At least this is what I would hope for. And this is what I was able to access during times in my life where, if I was feeling like I don't think it's wise for me to be alone right now, but I really don't want to go back to a psychiatric facility. And I was able to go crash at a friend's house for a couple of nights, you know. That's kind of the spirit of it that I was so excited about is that, yeah, we can create this for folks. We can be that place in the community where someone can come for up to a week. Usually it's 5 days, 5 to 10 days is typical for a peer run respite that someone can come and stay. You have your own bedroom and you choose whether or not it's locked. There's nobody doing bed checks or anything like that. It's your space for the time that you're there. It's meant to be a place that you can choose what it looks like for you in terms of what you're needing and wanting to navigate that crisis. So it could be that if you want to spend a whole lot of time sleeping and catching up on sleep, you get to do that. If you are really just wanting to talk with other people, there's someone available because it's staffed 24/7. So you always have someone available to talk to if you want to. And you can also, often some of the best peer support I saw happening was among the folks that were staying there. It was folks that were in the thick of it themselves who were able to truly understand what it was like and to be able to empathize and offer support and encouragement to one another.
Yeah, I mean, another new concept for me, this whole peer run respite. And I
Mhm.
honestly don't know that enough people know that something like this even exists, especially in this part of Wisconsin.
Mhm.
And it's such a great alternative for people,
Yeah.
just to know that they have that choice. They don't have to necessarily go to the hospital or go to treatment or go, whatever that
Mhm.
looks like for them. So I think that that's a really great thing to have and, just a great resource for our area. Are there models like that throughout the country and other states?
Yes, and not nearly enough of them.
Okay.
So, Wisconsin is really, I think, leading the way in some really fantastic ways. So there are currently, um, oh gosh, how many are there now? I think close to, I'm I don't know for sure if the one further north in Superior has opened yet or not, but yeah, there are a number of them throughout Wisconsin. So, and there's also a veteran specific one
I saw,
outside of Milwaukee.
and I keep getting emails that they're maybe it's the same one in Milwaukee, or maybe they're trying to open another veteran specific one. But I think
Mm,
that that's awesome that those,
hmm.
are available to folks. And I think
Yeah.
we'll definitely include some links in the description for people that are
Hmm.
interested in that. So
Yeah.
um
Yeah, and then in different parts of the country, um, again, it varies from state to state. Massachusetts has some really great things happening, and that's where I've learned the most, honestly, is the work of the Wildflower Alliance and AFIA, Peer Run Respite. The East Coast is where there has been, I think, the longest in terms of the number of peer respites and how long some of them have been in operation. California as well. But again, there are respites in development growing all across the country. I'm regularly in communication with so many different programs that are opening up. So it's exciting. And it's also a time, I think, to be really mindful of keeping true to the model, because I think there is also some co-optation happening where people who have good intentions possibly, but are not fully understanding the importance of it being truly peer run and non-clinical, who are wanting to uh, create some kind of crisis alternative, but are still kind of repeating the harmful practices that happen in those more restrictive environments and don't realize the potential for that harm if they call it respite and it's not actually a peer run respite. So that's something else that I think is important to highlight as we talk about that as a resource. And if folks are seeking out that resource, to really be aware of, is this truly peer run and peer led?
um Vic, would you mind talking a little bit about intentional peer support and the work that you're doing with that?
Yeah, that is so I know I'm guessing a lot of people are who are coming to peer support now as a profession are getting trained with state certified peer specialist trainings, curriculum. I know that was part of your experience, Kyle. I used to be a trainer for Wisconsin's Peer Specialist Employment Initiative. But before the states, before certification, before any of this professionalization of peer support, there was, a psychiatric survivors movement largely of, folks who saw the need for mutual support of one another, who, recognize that we know that we don't want what the psychiatric system is offering because all they offer is force and over medication and all of those harms that people experienced and still experience in certain settings. And then there's also the legacy with, substance use support, the 12-step model, and those other kinds of, mutual aid kind of support systems. And so intentional peer support is part of that legacy, and it was founded by Sherry Mead and others who survived those systems. Sherry's story is one that you can read about in her personal retrospective, and she talks about her experiences in the psychiatric system and how she and others came together. And actually, they were part of what is considered one of the first peer-run respites in the United States. And it was some of those lessons learned of how do we support one another during those times of crisis, during those intense situations where we don't want to do what was done to us in terms of the power, taking away our power. Um, so what do we do instead? And so intentional peer support grew out of that. And it's very much focused on relationship and how do we stay connected and stay curious and share power and not be trying to control the outcome for someone else, and to do that in our everyday lives. So it wasn't necessarily seen as, this is the training you have to have in order to get a job, but it was more about how do we transform our relationships so that we can transform the world around us. And Sherry has a quote that we often use in the trainings about how intentional peer support isn't about creating better services, but it's about transforming our relationships. It's about social change.
It's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Um,
Mhm.
so can you talk a little bit about what you see are challenges in the peer support field or maybe challenges that you've experienced yourself?
Mm. Oh gosh, that's yeah. Trying to think of what direction I want to go in for that. I think so. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to kind of back up a little bit and talk about what are the other things that I think have has influenced how I do peer support, and hopefully this will make sense when I come around to it. But one of the other experiences that I haven't talked about, and one that's been coming up lately because uh, when we're doing this particular recording, it's after all of the storm upheaval and the disaster in Western North Carolina and Appalachia and Florida. And uh, there is just this catastrophic damage that is just uprooting people's lives so incredibly. And what I'm also seeing are the ways in which mutual aid is coming through for folks and communities are supporting one another. And I've been thinking about that a lot because one of my other experiences was doing disaster relief work a year after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And I was part of a group that was focused on that lens of mutual aid. So it wasn't, and the slogan was solidarity, not charity. And so one of the things that I did in my role there is that we put together this community center where folks could come and have access to the internet, have access to a phone, fax machine, because fax machines were still a thing, and any forms that needed to be sent to FEMA for FEMA applications, they all had to be faxed. And so, uh, yeah, I could tell so many stories about that. Anyway, regularly there would be people calling. They would get our number and hear that, oh, there's this organization that can maybe help you out. It's all free. And so folks would call who were having trouble with FEMA, they were having trouble with whatever. There were so many people that were trying to return who had been displaced and they were just starting to return and trying to figure out what to do. And so I would take these calls and people would tell the most devastating stories. And they were stories of that I was just stunned silent, like time after time. There was nothing I could say. And that ended up being the best response because so many people just needed to be heard. And if I had tried to offer some platitude or some advice or anything, there was no need for that. It would have made things worse. And oftentimes I would get to the end of the call, I'd be able to offer, you know, maybe some resources or tell them about something, but often there was really nothing I could do. And by the end of the call, though, more than once, someone would say, "Thank you so much. You are the first person who took the time to listen to my story." And this is over a year after Katrina and the levee failures and all of that. And people just needed that space. And so those kinds of experiences are about how I approach peer support or how I try to approach peer support. And it's through that lens of mutual aid. It's like, I can't fix this for you. And even if I could, I wouldn't want to impose my solutions on you. But what I can do is I can show up. I can show up, I can hold space. Sometimes, when folks would come into the community center, it was just, here's some coffee, hang out for a bit. We can't change what happened. We can't make it all better, but we're here with you in community. And when I look at what are the challenges facing peer support, I think it is that pressure to move away from that pressure to compartmentalize it into goal setting or billable hours or um, progress towards recovery, whatever that means. And I think if we get into that kind of realm of categorizing this is what peer support looks like in systems, and that becomes the definition of peer support, we lose this element of community, this element of relationship, where I think peer support is strongest is when it is grounded in that recognition that we are here in community together. And you can't put that in a service note. You can't quantify that in terms of recovery capital or whatever terminology that is becoming the new buzzword or the new way that systems recognize peer support.
And honestly, when we start to talk about like outcomes and all those things, we're kind of just
Mhm.
replicating the same systems that we're trying to,
Yeah,
differentiate ourselves from. And
yeah.
you talked a little bit about listening to listen, and I can say that's a struggle of mine is, a lot
Mm,
of times I listen to respond. And so
yeah,
there's power in that. And you're right. A lot of
yeah.
times we can't fix it, even though we want to, and even though I have a
Mhm.
bunch of solutions for you.
Yeah,
But it doesn't, yeah, I think that's a powerful thing just to have someone that's there to listen to you um and even in my own life, sometimes that's all I want is someone to listen, I don't need
yeah.
anybody to tell me. I have enough people telling me
Mhm.
what to do. So
Yeah, exactly.
oh, that's awesome. What do you see as the future of peer support, or where do you see, peer support? I guess you kind of talked about it because,
Mhm.
it's a two-sided thing,
Yeah.
as peer support grows and gets, is in some of these systems, obviously, there's going to
Mhm.
be expectations with that and when you're billing and
Mhm.
all of that stuff. But can you talk a little bit about the future and what you see?
I think what I most hope for is those of us who have been trained in these models, whether it's a state certified peer specialist training, whether it's intentional peer support, whether it's other um, survivor and peer-led trainings, like I'm thinking alternatives to suicide or hearing voices network trainings. I think all of them at their best are, or what I hope for will, is that they are used for communities, that they're not for systems or for nonprofit organizations. Because what I see happening, and others have said this much better than me, so none of this is my original idea. Um, but with this professionalization comes, I think, this handing away or giving away power of saying, oh, I'm not equipped to talk about suicide, for example, or I'm not capable of doing this because I'm not a peer specialist, or I haven't been trained. And I would sometimes hear this too, and I still hear this of folks, when I was helping manage Monarch House, for example, we didn't require peer specialist certification for folks to work there, and that was very intentional. And it's not to say that training isn't important, it's very important. And it's not the be all end all. There needs to be this recognition that we can all offer support to one another. that peer support existed long before there was certification, professionalization, all of that. It is as old as human beings who have gone through difficult times together. And I think if we lose sight of that, we are erasing some important histories. We're also erasing um, different spiritual legacies, different indigenous traditions. There are examples throughout human history of what do you do when things are difficult? What do you do when someone is in crisis? There are so many ways of doing that that I think we're losing sight of if we continue to put it in this box that is connected to behavioral health services. Because these behavioral health services, the field of psychiatry, these are very new and young. Like they've only been around for a few hundred years. And we have outside of that so many other traditions and legacies to learn from. And so that's where I want to continue to explore through that spiritual lens, through those different healing lineages of, what did people do when something catastrophic happened that wasn't connected to what we conceptualize now as peer support, and see what can we learn from that. And I think, and then bringing that back to our communities. So that's something that I hope to keep doing too, is to be in community with folks who are not doing peer support and let them know that you can do this too, that I am nobody special because I'm comfortable talking about suicide or self-harm, or folks who are hearing or seeing things differently. That, yeah, maybe I'm a little more comfortable than others because I just have had a lot of those experiences, or I've been in community with people who have those experiences, so it's more familiar to me. And that doesn't mean that you who are doing a completely different job are incapable of doing that. Because I think if we don't give people those opportunities to hold space for one another, then what happens is folks get scared and they get uncomfortable. And then that often leads to those harmful responses of calling the police if they're feeling scared, when actually what they could do is just sit and listen and say, I don't really know what's going on right now with you. I'm feeling really scared. What can we do together? I'm going to be here with you. I'm not going to leave you. What is the way forward together?
You've touched on so many really positive points, like, having those conversations, and not, I don't know, straying away from them, right? Because I think that's where
Mhm,
so much of the stigma comes from, is like, well, I'm not
mhm,
qualified to have that
mhm,
conversation, or I'm not comfortable having that conversation.
mhm,
So I think, just offering that real peer support, and
mhm.
having those tough conversations and holding that space for people, it's just such a powerful thing. I just appreciate that. Um, Vic, I am so grateful that we had the opportunity to talk
Mhm.
this morning. I just want to give you kind of this last opportunity, if there's anything else that you want to talk about or share.
Oh gosh. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to reflect on this, because I think a lot of times I continue to just do the work day to day, and I don't always take the time to reflect. So I'm grateful for the conversations that we've been having that have given me that opportunity to think about, how did I come to this point in my life, or what is important to me? So I think any time that we get to hold space for one another like that, these are the kinds of conversations that are helpful for me, and that, get me thinking about how can I offer that to someone else, and how can I, be curious with others. So just just thank you for that.